I want to start off this debate by first explaining, or rather doing my best to explain what these different Indian national parties are under status quo, because I think the info slides was really, really long and confusing. I'll try my best to break it down. So first, I want to focus on who this Aam Aadmi Party is and what it prioritizes. I think there are three priorities by the Aam Aadmi Party. The first is to try to help the common man, which is their general rhetoric throughout all their campaignings, right? And headed by the guy called Arvind Kejriwal, who is the party head. You can tell that a lot of the party's emphasis is to try to focus on the common man, the working class. Like hell, even the symbol of the party is a broom, like a literal broom, because of the party's manifesto, which aims to focus a lot of its attention on the working middle class. The second thing that the Aam Aadmi Party wants, as stated in the info slide, is to achieve a certain degree of decentralization of power from the center. This looks like, for instance, Arvind Kejriwal trying to ensure that the police that govern states should not be owned and should be liberated from the power of the federal government. And we think that this one seat in Delhi, the one seat the party owns in Delhi, shows how difficult the party has in how the extent of difficulty the party has in trying to wrestle power away from the federal government under status quo. I think the third thing that the party wants is to just generally get more seats, right? And we think the most effective way is therefore under our world to align with the Indian National Congress, which is one of the strongest opponents to the BJP right now, in order to gain the strongest possible fighting chance against the BJP in the ideal scenario. So we think that the counterfactual is that in opposition's world is that we don't think the Aam Aadmi Party will ever ally themselves with the BJP as an alternative, because we think that Arvind Kejriwal himself is extremely opposed to the ideology of Narendra Modi, who exercises extremely conservative and Hindu fundamentalist values, whereas Kejriwal is much more forward-looking and is therefore more ideologically opposed to whatever, and is more ideologically opposed to whatever the BJP stands for, which means that we think that it's far more likely in our world for the Aam Aadmi Party to want to align itself to the INC, because the counterfactual is completely ideologically opposed to whatever the party stands for. What is our policy for the House today? We think that we want the Aam Aadmi Party to be part of the United Progressive Alliance within Congress. We think the Aam Aadmi Party is going to be a strong stakeholder in the UPA, and we think this is necessary because there are also other smaller parties that are part of the UPA and the Indian National Congress, but we want the Aam Aadmi Party to be a strong presence in this coalition under the United Progressive Alliance. We think that is the most effective way in challenging the BJP for power. We don't think that the burden under our side is to show that our policy is definitely going to guarantee a win, only that it cements a higher possibility for a win. So we think that, and I'm going to be proving this in three arguments. First, why is this the most likely way to win the election? Second, why is this the best time for a coalition? And third, even if we don't win this election, why is necessarily a good thing for the people on the ground? But first, why is this necessarily the most likely way to win the election? We think that the INC, that the main issue that the INC currently faces is that it does not have the same amount of social momentum. And note how it's social momentum and not the degree of influence. For the reason because Kejriwal, who is the head of the Aam Aadmi Party, has a relatively strong rhetoric in high prioritization, for instance, of economics for the common man. But he doesn't have the same amount of clout and reputation the INC has. On the counterfactual, the INC suffers a huge amount from having very lackluster rhetoric. What does this mean? The corruption scandals involved in the INC were actually centered around Rahul Gandhi, who was the head of the INCs, was actually revolved around Rahul Gandhi's brother-in-law, who was the center of this kind of corruption scandals. But we think the public actually under status quo tends to blame everything on that one particular party because of that relation that Rahul Gandhi's brother-in-law has with Rahul Gandhi himself. So we think that the reason why the INC has been associated with so much of these corruption scandals with individuals not part of his party is because the INC himself has been unable to portray itself as an eloquent and individual who is able to garner and move the hearts and minds of individuals and voters on the ground. We think that's the primary reason why INC is currently suffering as a whole and unable to topple the giant that is the BJP. On the counterfactual in our world, we think that Kejriwal, number one, is able to be portrayed as a leader that appeals to the common man and generally has very positive eyes from the public and those individuals that he has been able to reach out to. However, in that kind of scenario, under status quo, we see that Aam Aadmi Party already has a huge problem in the terms of trying to campaign to a larger group. This means that Aam Aadmi Party, because of itself being a small political party, doesn't have the same kind of campaigning funds as compared to the INC when it comes to trying to reaching out to large numbers of people on the ground. This looks like, for instance, not having sufficient campaigning funds to go on to more rural areas to campaign their rhetoric. This looks like not having enough individuals to plan and to strategize what the exact kind of route you should take in entering the political sphere. We think that these two characterizations of the INC and the Aam Aadmi Party therefore work together to show that there is a possible benefit in a coalition that comes to this. Furthermore, we argue too that both the Aam Aadmi Party as well as the INC are incredibly center-right and are both opposed to the BJP because both have a common ideology in the terms of forwarding their policy of swaraj, which is the policy of freedom, and we think that this is the same commonality that can unite these two parties. But we think more importantly, the Aam Aadmi Party under status quo is structurally impossible to gain a larger momentum and awareness because of its relatively small size, which we think will never get the same amount of effect and impact as a small party, which means that the opposition to BJP will continue to exist in India as fragmented parties that all struggle with unique problems that cannot be mended in the absence of a coalition. But second, why is this the best time for a coalition? We would argue to you that Rahul Gandhi, the president of the Indian National Congress, has already publicly apologized for the corruption scandals that have been going around. This shows that there has already been a swing to a more positive perspective and more positive optics when it comes to viewing the INC in general. But furthermore, we argue to you that perceptions of the BJP are also on the decline. Things like, for instance, the demonetization, the introduction of the centralized GST, all these things specifically hurt the middleman the most. However, and this amount, that the shift in the kind of political game right now and the demographic and the view of the individuals in as a result of BJP means that it's the opportune time for the Aam Aadmi Party to make its move. But the only way it can capitalize on this is to make sure that when it does make its move, it makes its move in the most impactful and most effective way. And to do that, it needs the support of a larger party, which is the INC. We therefore think this guarantees the highest rate of success from the coalition because now there's more ability and more traction to move forward. But thirdly, why even if we don't win this election, it's necessarily a good thing for people on the ground. We think that this coalition on its own can be effective in showing the flaws and exposing the flaws of the BJP, which makes it more visceral for individuals on the ground, because right now the BJP is shown to not be as infallible as it once was before, to show that the BJP is no longer as invulnerable as everybody thought it once was because of the Indian lineage, right? We think right now when there's a strong opposition to the BJP, that is when individuals on the ground can therefore try and reconsider a positive and actually functioning counterfactual rather than sticking to the incumbent by trusting the incumbent can decide what's best for them because of historical reasons. We think all these reasons show that it's incredibly important for the Aam Aadmi Party to form a coalition with the INC. We cannot be proud to stand on government.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to start the op case.
Hello, am I audible and clear?
Yep.
All right, thank you. I'll start my speech. It is in the interest of a political party to win an election, yes. But that victory is only meaningful insofar as you're able to enact the change that you want once you are in parliament. I want to first talk about what does forming a coalition mean for the AAP in terms of what it's allowed to discuss. And it simply means that concessions will have to be made with regards to its stance. This is true because they will have to cooperate with the ICP. Even ignoring the obvious power dynamics that are at play from a big party subsuming a small party, they need to accept the fact that the AAP will be forced to take a more moderate stance towards anti-corruption and a plethora of other issues to assuage the growing concerns of the ICP. There will be internal pressure for the INC or the ICP, for the AAP members to be less stringent and less firm in the anti-corruption stance once you are in the coalition. But more importantly, is the fact that once the AAP is in that coalition, there will be internal structures to control what you can and are allowed to say, which means that the freedom of these AAP politicians are now severely limited in scope. You can't say things that are too against the ICP because now it would be contradictory towards party lines. It means that you lose the ability to criticize that party in a way that's the most visceral, the most direct, and the way that is most productive and constructive for discourse. Everything that these AAP politicians will now be able to say has to be filtered through the INC, which means that they can still control and orchestrate the discourse in a way that's perverse. This is the first thing I want to know about how this affects discourse in a way that's unproductive, meaning that even if they did win the election, which is speculative, they're unable to do it in a way that's ideologically consistent with what they currently support. Let's talk about principles, because I think that was something that they were willing to compromise on. There is a distinct ideological difference between the two parties, the INC and the AAP, and this makes the coalition incompatible. This means that the AAP, as mentioned earlier, will have to compromise on the very founding principles of their movement, which is a defiance to the status quo, to be a voice and a counterculture to the entrenched corruption and the hegemony that currently exists in Indian politics. This means that the AAP will be no better than the BJP or the INC because it's committing this ideological hypocrisy in an attempt to win this game of politics, as opposed to staying true to what it actually cares about, the common man, the people on the ground. We think that they should not be deluded by the fact that the politics is a number game. We think that some things should not be compromised on. The first thing I want to talk about then is the identity as being against swaraj or being against corruption would be diluted. If not immediately, it will be diluted over time, because they are subsumed by what is perceived as to be the embodiment of corruption. They will be seen as sleeping with the enemy. And this is particularly important because this AAP is presumably one of the very few oppositions, if not one of the more prominent opposition parties that exist in India right now. This sleeping with the enemy will be seen as the death of opposition in Indian politics. That means even the last bastion that could fight against corruption has been consumed by the larger party. This is deeply demoralizing for not just other opposition parties, but also for the Indian voters who now feel that corruption is something inevitable, because even the last hope that we had has now succumbed to this game of numbers and has been subsumed by INC, which is also perceived to be the enemy. I'll deal with the responses they have to this later. But right now, I just want to note the optics of this coalition to the Indian voter base. But also, the AAP is likely to lose more than it stands to gain. The current voters and supporters will feel an acute sense of betrayal because of this coalition. This marriage of convenience that AAP is going to make is going to lose them the only thing that distinguishes them from other political parties now, which means that they are the very founding principles as to why this movement was important in the first place has been lost. What do we hear in response? The first thing that we hear was that ICP has already apologized. This is unclear that it will lead to any form of internal reform in the INC party. This is clearly they are apologizing because they are caught. It was a PR move. The second thing that they said was their ideological difference. Yes, if you pull that far back, all parties have similarities. Republicans and Democrats are both political parties. But if you look at the differences where it matters, where things like self-governance, decentralization, or being anti-corruption, I think that they differ there significantly. So again, I don't think that they can claim that this is something that is trivial to compromise on. I think this is something relatively severe to compromise on, right? Losing the ability for you to be counterculture against status quo, so on and so forth. Now I want to go on into the other half of my speech, but before I move on, I'll take a POI from OG. Yes. OG?
Or mechanism to ensure that the Aam Aadmi Party actually gains some clout and becomes a prominent party in India. You lie to us when you tell us that they are one of the main parties in India. They're not. They have one seat.
Okay. So I think that brings me nicely into my speech, and I just want for you once to consider something that's not entirely as utilitarian as what opening government claims, because I think they have been blinded by this need to play the game of politics, right? To play this numbers game and to try to win seats. But if the goal was just to win a seat, then these ministers could have presumably just joined the INC and not have formed this coalition in the first place. We are the opposition because we are willing to fight that uphill battle. We are willing to pick the difficult fights. We think that there's a chance of winning on outside the house as well, especially since the INCP is being embroiled in more and more scandals and their public support is waning and weakening. There is a political opportunity here that we can capitalize on that only exists when you're not in a coalition with the INC. We can, with time, draw on those voters who fall out with the INC and slowly begin to realize that they are being screwed over and become disenchanted with the status quo. That will form the foundation of our voter base. We think that any victory has to be a moral victory as well. We are not willing to compromise on that on our side of opening opposition. But I want to prove that it's hard to work within the system on their side of the house as well. When your identity has been co-opted by the INC, they will nudge your ideology more and more towards the center or towards a way that is beneficial towards them. So the upshot of this argument is this, is that playing party politics, the very thing that OG stands for in order to win more seats, is something that uniquely doesn't work in the favor of a small coalition. In fact, if the argument is, the point of the POI was to say that the AAP is extremely small, that presumably means when they're in a coalition, they have less political will and less political sway to actually influence the INC in a way that's meaningful on their side of the house. I want to draw an analogy to American politics because that's something I know a bit more about. Things like Bernie Sanders being the Democratic Party of the in the United States, his ability to push for things that are far left is severely limited because he cannot deviate too far from party lines. Things like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi forcing his ideology to be more center-left than more far-left, meaning that he dilutes the ability for him to push for things that he actually stands for. This means that risking party damage becomes one of the main things that AAP has to stand for, and the outcome, therefore, is going to be symmetrical on both sides of the house where they're unable to enact any change. This is where I want to conclude my speech with a best-case, worst-case scenario. on the best case on their side of the house, the INC wins, hooray, right, kumbaya. But you are condemned to having a minimal voice in parliament, therefore. Your voice will be moderated and diminished. In our worst case scenario, even if we do not win, we still have the ability to change minds and fight the good fight. We still have the ability to preserve the ideological purity that we are against corruption and we are against the status quo. Even if I've already proven to you that not the case, it's a definite defeat. We think that keeping this hope alive is something that's important because on their side of the house, they're just changing hands of the corruption. They don't actually fix the problem. Even if INC wins, if INC is just as corrupt as the BJP, does that actually make any observational difference? I don't really think so. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to invite the DPM.
Yeah, just give me like 10 seconds, please.
Yeah, can.
Yeah, ready?
Yep.
Okay, let's start. Let's do a little Indian politics 101, right? What does India as its climate of politics actually look like? It has three very important features. Firstly, nobody is absolutely pure and holier than thou. Everybody is a fucking vote-hungry bastard who wants to get to the top, including Arvind Kejriwal, who was accused of taking a bribe of rupees 2 crores from Kapil Mishra, the Indian finance minister, at that point in time. We feel that literally nobody has this sort of complete purity or Puritan sort of stance, right? It is at that point in time when we feel that even if we admit that these particular corruption scandals and whatnot are going to be something that are important, these people are still going to have it in their best interest to actually be associated with these political parties. Second thing to note about Indian politics, the Indian media and people love gossip, right? They like to shit on Rahul Gandhi, who is the president of the Indian National Congress, to an extent that they clown him. They call him Pappu because he has a raspy voice. They tell that he watches Indian kids' cartoons and whatnot. This means that the Indian National Congress, while it has establishment, it has been in power for 25 years before the BJP actually came in, ensured that it does not essentially have a rhetoric. What does Arvind Kejriwal have? Arvind Kejriwal has a rhetoric. He tells people that, bro, you have 200 units of electricity and lesser being consumed in 1 month. I will make your electricity bill free. And he's able to do that because he has the sort of finance, the sort of finance divestment portfolios that he puts into the state of Delhi as the chief minister, right? Their entire claim, and I'm going to take down Kevin's entire speech point by point and deconstruct it, right? But before that, let's talk about what is the third most important thing in Indian politics in and of itself. And this is very important, that it's nowhere related to any other country. So in this entire debate, I do not want to hear examples of other democracies like America. It's a multi-party system where the only way you can win, and this is important, is via a coalition. The BJP is part of the National Democratic Alliance and the Congress is part of the United Progressive Alliance. And both of these things mean that the NDA and the UPA are the only things that you can utilize to effectiveness to actually get those sort of seats and that particular political clout that you have in and of itself. The only way you can win is with a coalition. I was waiting in the entire speech for Kevin to actually come up and tell us a counter prop. How the fuck is Aam Aadmi Party going to survive? The motion slide simply says, even if I don't put in my big brown brain to tell you what Indian politics is, the motion slide says that this particular party is rising in popularity, which means people are thinking that, oh, this Arvind Kejriwal are doing good job in Delhi and whatnot. But the reality of the situation is that they do not have establishment. They do not have resources. Darren tells you they do not have things like campaigning power. This is something that the Indian National Congress has because they have congressmen in every single fucking city. You have people like Shashi Tharoor in Tamil Nadu who are revered because of the sort of liberal and the leftist stances that they take in and of itself. And we think that that is very, very important to note in and of itself as a scenario. Let's quickly move on to the rebuttals. Firstly, they tell us that, oh, but this victory is only meaningful in and of itself if we are able to eliminate these corruption scandals, right? And these particular concessions have to be made. They give no assertion as to why this is true. We feel that even within the Indian politics, within the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, people do in and of itself ensure that within the coalition, they are able able to counter each other's narratives. This looks like the Bahujan Samaj Party or the Samaj Party alliance actually going against the BJP within a particular Lok Sabha Congress to actually vote against a particular bill, even though they were part of that alliance. So we think that these particular people will still be able to present their dissent even if they are in a minority. But why is this not going to be true, right? Because the Indian National Congress realizes that the Aam Aadmi Party is fucking important for them, right? They have that sort of rhetoric that is going on right now, that we want to help the common man. You've seen Arvind Kejriwal. He roams around with a scarf on his neck and dresses up as an Indian common man because he wants to appeal to the people in and of itself. That is the sort of rhetoric we need. That is the sort of rhetoric we need to counteract that fucking Modi-Shah alliance that is there within the BJP right now in and of itself. And that is something which is extremely important, right? Because recognize that opening opposition does not engage with Darren's entire analysis of even if this party loses, the BJP will shit their pants in and of itself and ensure that they do not have any sort and ensure that they are going against certain things like the CAA or the NRC and are not able to pass these bills that are creating so many protests. BJP is already losing power, and even if the INC and AAP Congress and the AAP coalition does not win, we still feel at that point in time the BJP is going to reform because they're going to be shit scared that this opposition is extremely strong. It is the strongest opposition that they have seen in years. The reason that this motion exists is because these particular opposition, this particular coalition in and of itself is something that is extremely strong and right. The only matter then is about whether or not you can compromise on a principle to ensure that, right? And while I've told you that even that principle doesn't exist, let's bite the bullet, right? Even if they are not able to completely eliminate corruption, we think that they will be able to decentralize certain structures. Darren tells you this when he talks to you about how they're able to decentralize police from the federal power, right? How will this happen? It's because Arvind Kejriwal has something called a modular approach towards how he functions and how he runs Indian politics in and of itself, right? Because it actually looks like ensuring that people are responsible for the sort of changes within their community, that people are responsible for saving the environment by having lesser electricity. He's taking the accountability from the federal government onto the people, and he's going to be able to push that rhetoric much further on our side of the house, right? Then they tell us that these particular people will be seen as sleeping with the enemy, and people will talk, and our only response is that Indian National Congress has apologized, right? While that is true that the Indian National Congress has already apologized, people have short-lived memories. This is gossip. This is cheap thrills. These things start to slowly evade within the media in and of itself. Right now, Rahul Gandhi is starting to slowly gain popularity as well. This actually looks like Rahul Gandhi being appointed as or Rahul Gandhi being actually be able to win the certain amounts of seats that he did win in the 2019 election, in the 2014 election, even though he was excessively clowned, right? This looks like Rahul Gandhi going to certain villages and areas to ensure, because he has the infrastructure, because he has the backing of Indira Gandhi ruling India for over 20 years now, he has those particular infrastructures to ensure, and he has agents everywhere within India, and that is something that the Aam Aadmi Party can essentially in and of itself characterize, can actually capitalize on, right? And the fact is that now people are starting to love the Congress. Look at MLAs like Rajnikant, who has like an immense amount of support in a country like India and of itself. We think that is something which then becomes extremely important, right? Darren tells you so many important things that this is in the absolute best interest of the Aam Aadmi Party to essentially do, to be able to forward their narratives, because they will be able to carry out this decentralization in an absolutely perfect manner in our world, right? But even if they aren't, we still think that the BJP is going to reform for the better, right? Because the BJP is also very stringent on their principles and recognize in the fringe case that they do fucking win in and of itself, they in the very, very small chance, or even in the chance that they win, what essentially happens is that you are able to take out a completely fascist government from power that is racist, that is right-wing, and that is in and of itself someone who essentially has a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric, right? Who has prioritized things like demonetization, which has hurt the middleman in and of itself. Modi is losing support, and it's time for Arvind Kejriwal to be able to capitalize on that by gaining the political crowd from the Indian National Congress. For all those reasons, Jai Hind.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Wait, let me see. I guess it is quite nice to have Indian political knowledge, and I guess it is nice to have some contextual knowledge to think about the debate. The problem is, if you don't tell us how the AAP can get some level of regional dominance or some level of a pathway towards victory, their side only assumes that them being subsumed into the INC will be put, without actually telling us how exactly that is supposed to be good in the first place. The assumptions coming from their side was quite problematic. They said that the INC is going to take in the AAP and therefore within themselves they're going to have a strong voice. But we already tell you right from Kevin that the strong voice is just a veneer of illusion. That strong voice is going to be something that's compromised in general. We think that all these things make it such that even if we join a coalition, the only thing to really stand out as the AAP is to really stand for what the workers stand for. Meaning to say, is to really stand for the swaraj model, go against the swaraj model, to say that it is important to decentralize. Otherwise, the other approach that you're taking is just being entrenched into what current politics look like. We think what we need to do is to stand in solitude, even if it means that we are going to lose the current election, but gain support in the next 5 years in general. I'm going to do just two very basic things. The first thing is, how do you win an election? And secondly, how do you strengthen the support on your side? Because side opening government has never done any of that and just like try to spill over like spec knowledge about Indian politics, right? Without actually telling you how the AAP can therefore gain some dominance. We tell you very specifically that even if there's low support now, the fact that there's rising political support is proof that standing independently is much better, because you have some chance of slowly gaining that dominance. So what do you have? So the first argument I'm going to make is, how do you win an election? The first thing that opening government fails to consider is that they lose the ability to support what you stand for. Meaning to say, if let's say you as a person who goes against the swaraj model joins the party that actually stands for the swaraj model, you lose the ideological purity and the consistency that your ideas stand for. It is literally like Andrew Yang, who supports the freedom dividend, going into a Democratic Party and just dropping the freedom dividend altogether. It's the same thing. We think that all these things, right, make it such that your support and your political support and your political allure is reduced altogether, and you don't have any ability to campaign for anything else and to make yourself unique in the whole political sphere. Yes, maybe OG is right in saying that there's a lot of gossip, there's a lot of all these things that exist. But the reality is, as long as we appear to have a veneer of purity, rather than compared to the shit show that currently happens in Indian politics, we think we are far better than compared to any other side. Just because the entire Indian politics is a shit show doesn't mean that the AAP is supposed to join along and just sing kumbaya and hope that we win, right? The more important thing is that, the second thing is that when you are being subsumed by the INC, their side claims that you can still have a strong voice. But the reality is that they never mechanize how that strong voice is going to be conjured in the first place. Our side tells you that their side, the reality on opening government side is a possibility, but the reality on opening opposition side, meaning to say they will never get the voice because they're such a small party, which is what opening government considered, is that they will have zero voice whatsoever. And even if they try to voice out their concerns, and they try to go against some of the things that are within the coalition, what is likely to be characterized within the news, as OGs rightly characterizes as very gossipy, right, is that there will be infighting within the coalition that currently happens. That's what happened to the Pakatan Harapan currently, right? Which means that there are so many coalitions that's coming together and nobody gets control and voice of what exactly happens on the ground. We think that is really problematic, because you don't gain control and you cannot be accountable to your current supporters that are at hand. We think that if this is the real end game on their side, they entirely lose this debate and they don't really know how to win elections. I guess Indian politics is good, but if you don't have political science 101, maybe not. So the second thing we really want to talk about is that, how do you strengthen support? The first thing to note about this is that if you join the INC as a minority party, right, first you have no control over the rhetoric that you really want to stand for, meaning you are just like a chump change. Hopefully you get some more votes for the INC. But the reality is more damaging than that. Meaning to say that if you don't have the ideological standpoint, meaning to say that you stand against what the INC stands for, it is very likely that all your ideologies in the future will be washed away as well, because of the hypocrisy that you currently stand for. Meaning to say that you are against the swaraj model and now you're not against the swaraj model. We want to say we are against the swaraj model, but then again we are not, because of the kinds of trap that you are currently put yourself in. Meaning to say the AAP, if you join the INC, is stuck in a rock and a hard place. Meaning to say that they really don't have anything to market themselves. And what's worse is that under their side, they lose the ability to market themselves for 5 years. And that's a long time for you to gain support, by the way, because you are currently in a coalition with the INC, who tries to win some level of political party. And just be clear, right? We're not saying and we're not guaranteeing that they will win in the first place. So if they're joining in coalition and they lose, we think that that's even worse for them, because they are a losing party. And even though they join coalition with those two things, So the idea that they will just suddenly magically win and all this gossipy nonsense is really just all uncontentious nonsense, and we don't think those things will be part of the debate altogether. The reality here is this: winning political support is quite easy, and the reality behind it is that you need to stand for something that is strong, and you need to stand for something that many people support. But the problem is, if you deviate away from that reality, if you deviate from the things that people resonate with, what happens is that you don't get the support that you have. People are disenfranchised by the very same thing. What you trade off with temporary success is you trade it off with overarching and permanent idea and permanent ideological standpoint, right? Meaning to say all the things that people you currently stand for, meaning to say the decentralization of government, the accountability that you stand against, all these things are washed away because you are part of the gang that actually want that particular thing, right? So when Kevin tells you that you are sleeping with the enemy and you're sleeping with the devil, that reality is quite true. And we think that what's happening under our side is that you are making it far worse for the AAP. Yes, we think the AAP currently doesn't have any ability to win, but if you want to side with Rohan and say that, yeah, I guess this is an excuse to go to INC, what will happen is that you would condemn the AAP into further obscurity, into further nonsense where you lose support altogether, you lose funding, and everything about your party becomes just a mess because you don't know what you stand for. And even if you say in the future that you stand for all these workers' rights and you stand for all these things, right? The people will not trust you because of the things that you have done in the past. So in all these essence, right, what we need to think about is what the reality stands for and how you win a political election. Very proud to oppose.
Cool. Okay. On closing opposition, we recognize that winning the next elections are not the only goal in today's debate. We recognize that 20, 30 years down the line, what defines the ability of a political party to remain relevant is its ability to create an independent identity. It's able to win local elections and have local strongholds, but also to have a place on the political spectrum and make sure that they're not just grouped up with other individual groups. And therefore we say, coming from closing opposition, that we're not against coalitions in principle. However, we say that at this particular moment, when the AAP is just starting to get power and is just starting to get some support, we think that at this moment it will do more harm than good. What is the alternative we propose? We propose the AAP perhaps forming coalitions with other smaller parties to make sure that they're not subsumed under a larger coalition, like for example, the Indian Communist Party, or for example, we would be perfectly willing to have them stay on their own. And we think it's a viable election strategy for them to focus on the common man, and in doing so, take away votes from the BJP, because the BJP also has this very same voter base. What is the extension coming from side closing opposition? We think that we're going to provide how we're going to get the long-term goal of maintaining a force within Indian politics. What does that necessarily mean? While opening opposition had largely the same goal, we think that the only mechanism they were able to provide was this idea of ideology and trust, the idea that voters care about their ideology and therefore they'll see it as a betrayal when we don't do this. What will the extension provide? We'll provide two things. Number one, the crucial mechanism through which, if we join the coalition, why exactly this will not happen, because, for example, they'll be tainted in the memory of the voters, and, for example, you will lose voter-based loyalty. And second, we will also provide the counterfactual. In the long term, without a coalition, how is it that 20, 30 years down the line, the AAP will be able to remain a suitable force within Indian politics? We're going to show how OO cannot get their goals of maintaining long-term stability without the crucial mechanism that we provide. Before I move on to that, first a few layers of rebuttal. The main idea coming from opening government was this idea that when the AAP and the INC are able to ally, what happens is that there's power sharing, which is something that government came, but there's this idea that the INC will incorporate the views of the AAP. First of all, we don't think that's true, because if the INC has so much clout and so much power, as they say, then the AAP will not be an equal partner in this coalition. What is more likely is that the elite and powerful INC establishment, people that, for example, have ties to independence, are most likely to just subsume their views or get rid of their views entirely and just take the voters. But fine, even if their views are incorporated within the INC, we think it is still far more likely that even if they win this election, they won't win further elections, because long-term stability means that they need to maintain an independent identity, and they cannot do that if they are just under this huge umbrella of this entire coalition. Next, they gave both sides, no thank you, also gave us this idea about how, oh, this is a good time for us to take power because the INC is gaining power, and we have this, for example, the loss of support from the BJP and taking, for example, swing voters coming from government side. First of all, we don't think that's possible because the INC right now is still mired in corruption, mainly because of their association with the previous Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Singh, whose government was marred by things like, for example, incompetence in their financial systems, but also with corruption. And that's why the BJP was allowed to take so much power, because they were able to establish themselves as an anti-corruption and anti-establishment government that is so powerful and so popular right now. And we think that the AAP, through associating with the INC, will allow the BJP to also mire them in the same rhetoric that they use to get rid of the INC's, legitimacy. Why do we think, therefore, it's preposterous for government to claim that this will make the BJP change its policies in any way? We think that the BJP is so powerful right now that most of India is generally just okay with them doing autocratic things. Like, for example, BJP supporters beating up Muslims on the street, or BJP being able to take control of Kashmir. We think this shows that the BJP is not going to go anywhere, and therefore the short-term goal of winning elections and extracting concessions with them is just not going to happen on government side. So in that case, what do we care about coming from side closing opposition? We would say that the coalition would go against the AAP's agenda and make sure that in the long term their goals are not met. What is the main voter base that the INC and the AAP have? The INC, because of their historical association with Indian independence, is full of historical elite. Their leaders are people like Nehru, Gandhi, powerful rulers that, for example, are in the upper echelons and the elite of Indian society, and they are seen as individuals that are unable and are detached from the common man. The AAP, in contrast, has a voter base that is about the average man, appealing to voters that are, for example, from rural India, appealing to things like, for example, minority voters, like, for example, Muslims, or, for example, religious minorities, because they don't focus on the Hindu nationalist rhetoric that Modi is talking about. Why do we think necessarily, therefore, it will be bad if the AAP associates with the INC right now? Number one, it means they can no longer fight for the average man, and they lose that rhetoric. Why? Because the elitism and classism of the INC will always be associated with them, and we think that right now, because they're too small in the coalition, it will do more harm than good, because they will always be associated with the INC, and they will no longer be able to establish themselves as something that voters will in the long term care about. Second, we also think that they will always also be associated with the incompetence that is inside the INC. The INC, for example, during its regime as a central left party, pushed for raising tax for the middle class. This was hugely unpopular and pushed India into an economic crisis. We think that AAP, if they want to say that they care about getting poor votes, will not be able to have that kind of legitimacy. But third, we also say that the INC right now is losing a lot of power because of the Prime Minister Singh, and he's been corrupt and incompetent, and a lot of foreign aid just ended up in the pockets of the INC elite. We think that is Modi's government that is able to mar the AAP in this kind of conspiracy and group them up under this banner, because if they associate with them through a coalition. So we don't think that it's possible for them to maintain any sort of legitimate image after this. What is the counterfactual coming from side closing opposition is the crucial mechanism. We think that in the long term, the AAP has a viable political strategy to take away votes from Modi and the BJP, who pride themselves on focusing on the common man and are right now seen as the only alternative and the only option for the common man to vote for. They can establish themselves as an alternative to that. We think that they're going to be able to succeed in long term for three reasons. Number one, because Modi is quite Hindu nationalist, meaning that he does not appeal to, for example, minorities and people that are outside of the common spectrum, meaning that they'll be able to get niche voters. Second, they'll also be able to win local elections and appeal to minorities within those places. For example, in more minority-dominated places in India. And third, if we think that Indian politics right now is so polarized to the point that if they establish themselves only in the middle of the INC, with the INC in the center of that political spectrum, it will be too difficult for them to establish their own identity. And we think it's far better for them to establish their own place on the political spectrum, far more left than the INC. For those reasons, we think to provide the crucial mechanism through which voters will lose trust and lose legitimacy in the AAP in the long term, but also the counterfactual of how we're able to maintain power in the long term. Very, very proud to oppose.
Okay, I'm gonna zoom in him. Okay, cool. The United Progressive Alliance, INC's current coalition, has 15 parties in it at the moment, or maybe 16, I don't remember the exact number, somewhere around that, right? 15 parties at the moment. Curiously enough, despite opening opposition's adamant protests, the BJP has not yet shit its pants. Now, the burden on opposition over government, the burden on government in this debate today was to prove to us that how the addition of one more small party will suddenly cause the BJP to shit its pants and suddenly make the United Progressive Alliance, which has failed for the past 2 elections, is increasingly becoming more and more unpopular. Suddenly, it will, through the joining of the AAP, change its entire destiny. Right? That was something that government had to prove to us in their 2 benches today. And that's something that they've absolutely failed to do. Right? Let's talk about the 3 questions in this debate. There's 3 questions that I'll answer. 1, does the INC need the AAP, as in will the United Progressive Alliance benefit from the AAP joining? 2, does the AAP need the INC? And even if they do, will they benefit from joining the INC? And 3, can the AAP make it on its own? Right? And is that preferable? Let's talk about this. Before that, though, one clarification: we completely agree with the government bench when they say that principles are useless in this debate. We agree that opening opposition's argument perhaps is not the most relevant in that case, right? We do think that politics is about pragmatism and self-interest, but we're going to prove to you how we win that debate exactly on those grounds, right? First question first. Does the INC need the AAP? And understand this, right? The INC alliance right now currently has parties like the Muslim League, has parties like Shiv Sena, has parties like the big one in Tamil Nadu that I've forgotten the name of. But anyways, the point is that it currently has parties as members of the alliance that are a lot more popular and a lot more powerful than the Aam Aadmi Party is at the moment, right? Or is likely to be in the near future. Yet despite all of these things, the INC and its coalition has not managed to take government away from the BJP in the past 2 elections. Why is this? This is because the Manmohan Singh government of INC was so deeply unpopular and such a huge royal fuck up that there is almost nothing on earth they can do at the current moment that will convince the Indian public's mind. I see you, no thank you, sir. Right? Maybe later. Right? That's the idea. So adding the Aam Aadmi Party into the mix will not do anything significant to change prospects for the United Progressive Alliance as far as the next 2, 3, maybe 5 elections are concerned, right? It's just not going to happen. The second idea over here, right? The idea that the AAP will somehow benefit from joining this coalition. That's funny because interestingly enough, none of the other parties have benefited from joining the coalition as much. Their results have just about stayed the same, if not decreased, because of their association with the INC. But more so, the idea of this partnership benefiting the AAP rests in the assumption that this partnership is an equal partnership. It is not. Simply by virtue of the fact that not just is the INC much bigger and much more powerful than the AAP, but the fact that the alliance already has 15 other parties in it means that the AAP, as its newest comer and one of its smallest parties, will be at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to priorities, which means that it is at the bottom of INC's priorities to appease the AAP by helping them out in any way whatsoever when it comes to their coalition, right? They would much rather dedicate those resources and attention towards Muslim League, towards Shiv Sena, etc., right? That's the second idea. But the third idea here is, in fact, we think that it will harm the AAP a lot more to associate themselves with the INC at the current moment. And this is something that none of the other houses in this debate have analyzed, and something that Stephen talked to you about, but closing government also failed to engage with, right? The idea that currently Indian politics is extremely polarized. You have an extreme right of Hindu nationalists, and you have an extreme left of people who want progressive change, right? That's the idea. So the problem here is that at the Indian National Congress at this moment in history is going through a crisis of identity, which is only exacerbated by the United Progressive Alliance, right? Because the United Progressive Alliance currently contains parties of so many different views. For instance, Shiv Sena is an extremist party, right? A nationalist party. The INC claims to not be that. In fact, they claim to be center-left. Similarly, the Muslim League's interests are very, very different from both Shiv Sena and from the INC, right? The National Congress Party, a split of the INC, which is also in the alliance, it has historical beef with the INC. As a result of this, there is no clear direction that this alliance is heading towards at the moment, and the Indian people recognize that, which is why they don't vote for which is why the BJP has not lost an election in the past 2 times, right? That's the problem. By adding themselves to the mix of this already messy alliance, all the AAP does is that it also loses its own identity, something we talked to you about in Stephen's speech, not engage with, right? Because they simply make themselves one of many. They become a number in the INC's already very irrelevant umbrella, right? That's the problem, something that we've talked about. Okay, but let's move on, right? But before I move on, does closing have a POI? No? Okay, I'll take opening.
The new coalition will have AAP being a major stakeholder because their rhetoric is very strong, but they don't have establishment forming the strongest opposition against the BJP. Intuition suggests that the BJP, having the strongest possible opposition, is now going to change. We can trade examples to find out whether or not the BJP is actually gaining or losing popularity.
Okay, strong rhetoric, right? That's your point. Here's the thing. According to their voter base, Shiv Sena also has very strong rhetoric. According to their voter base, the Muslim League also has very strong rhetoric. Given that the AAP is a very small party, right, that is focused in Delhi, this idea that they have strong rhetoric, which is enough to convince the entire country, is very is absolutely false. Because understand this, Delhi's demographic is very different from the demographic of all of India, right? Delhi is relatively progressive and educated and has a very different class dynamic from the rest of India. So the idea that their strong rhetoric will apply to the entire country is false. But the last idea why the AAP is better on its own, because right now what the BJP is banking on is that moderate Hindus do not have another option. The AAP gives them an option because the AAE takes a firm stance on things like anti-corruption, like the BJP does, firm stance on economics, but it is not extremist in the same way the BJP is. So the AAP builds its identity for the next few years. It can take away those voters, something it can't do if it makes itself a number under the INC vote closing opposition.
All right, thank you very much, CEO.